Good morning. Glad to have every one of you with us today. My voice is just a little rough this week. It's probably going to be tougher on you than it is me, but I'm feeling all right. Just have a little thing that's going around. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try to take us on a journey this morning that deals with the idea of living for Jesus. And so if you'll open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 this morning, will serve as our springboard for our sermon today that I hope will help each one of us. This is what we call the great chapter of love that Paul has written. I'm not going to read all of it, but just one particular section that pertains to our lesson this morning. So if you'll look at chapter 13, verse 4 through 8, we'll begin there. Love is patient. Love is kind. And it's not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, and not provoked. Does not take into account wrong suffered. Does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. In living for Jesus, one of the things that we must do as a group of New Testament Christians is that we are the church that learns to live in such a way that Jesus is every part of our being. That sometimes when we talk about this great chapter of love, and we could camp here for the next year, but we're going to spend a few weeks at least talking about the idea. Eventually, I'm getting to the point of how we must learn to love others. And loving others does not always mean just loving people inside the body. If we're ever going to bring anybody to Jesus Christ, we must learn to love outside of the walls of this building. That we must learn to love others as this passage is teaching us that we bear with one another. You'll recognize the name William Penn. He said this most beautiful statement: love is the hardest lesson in Christianity, but for that reason it should be most our care to learn it. It should be most our care to learn it. In another way, I think is we oftentimes find ourselves that love is a hard thing for us to do. We have failed at love. And maybe we are failing at love now, and probably we will fail at love in the future. To be clear, I'm not talking about dating relationships. I'm talking about something that is much deeper and more important than that. I'm speaking about loving someone that is above all of the complicated of all human skills, that we really learn to be people that are loving and understanding with one another. You know, when we fail, I think we all make excuses. I want you to think about these, at least three that I'm going to share with you for just the next moment or two. When we fail, we oftentimes make excuses and say, I simply didn't have the time. Number two, I didn't want to get involved because I was afraid. Or next, I just simply didn't know how. As you can look at these, and as you heard me read those, you might be thinking, well, I could shoot holes in all of those because they really don't hold a lot of water. And yet, when we analyze ourselves, there is something that keeps us from risking and loving someone else that maybe we've never even met before. Isn't it sad for most of us that the inability of the human being that we have, that many of us don't possess the ability that we want to have. We don't take that into account, and we give so little love to so many other people around us. And we fail oftentimes in not being the kind of loving person that we know we ought to be. You say, well, how would that be, Brother Bailey? I would suggest, first of all, we might seldom spend time learning how to love. Really, when's the last time you took a course on learning to love? There's just not a lot of them out there. And our public schools, they don't teach us very much about the skills of love. Oh, they'll teach our kids other things that supposedly relate to love, but they don't tell our children how to love one another. Colleges, for the most part, skip over the entire subject of learning to love. Universities often offer no classes in loving or helpful relationships. No wonder, as a nation, no wonder as a world, we're failing at loving our fellow human beings. No wonder we fail at love. It's never been taught to us. Much less for many people growing up in homes, it's never been modeled for them how to love. And that comes on us as parents, that we must model for our children how to love others. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about loving the unlovable. I'm talking about loving the person that walks into the restaurant that doesn't look like you, that doesn't smell like you. I'm talking about learning to get out of our comfort zone and reach over and help a poor person that maybe doesn't have the money to buy a meal, but you offer to pay for their meal and say, God bless you. You don't need a clanging cymbal or a horn blowing to show your love. In fact, when it's done in a quiet manner, it's the biblical manner. There are other reasons many of us do not love and love as often as we should. It's because we've developed some attitude. And maybe we could put an S on the end of that and say we've developed attitudes along the way, not as we should. It's because we've developed the wrong attitudes in learning to share with those around us that might interfere with who we are. And it exacerbates our tendency to not love because we're not comfortable doing that. And so we grow comfortable by not getting involved and reaching out and loving others. A couple of weeks I've been talking about this idea of the love-care quotient. The love-care quotient is who we are and what we say to others, but more importantly, what we do. It's not just saying that we love one another, it's showing enough to care. Now let me give you an illustration of that. As some of you have done this week, you've made a phone call to Steve or Janet Madison. I made a phone call as well. I drove by their house. No one was there. I was willing to visit and to talk. No one was there, and so I tracked them down. And what I want to tell you is, they have told me about the outpouring of this church. That people have said, hey, we've got 2 rooms in our house on the other side of our home that nobody slept in those beds in months. We'd love to have you come and stay with us. And Steve and Janet were just overwhelmed. You know, that's great. That's what we ought to be as a church. But church, can we take that outside these walls? Can we take it outside these walls to be able to serve others and help one another? It is something that puts more meat on the bones of saying, oh, I love, but now let me show you how much I care. Do we really care to do that? Of over 8,600 people that were surveyed in this idea of the love-care quotient, several results came about, and I want to do these hurriedly because if I begin to talk about each one of them, we'll be here a long time. So let me kind of rush today. The question asked on the Love Care Quotient survey was, what do you feel are the barriers to love in a church congregation, in a church or congregation? And the barriers mentioned were some of these. They found they could be basically whittled down and put into 2 different groups. And the first one was the action group. The second group was that of attitudes. So we have action, no action, attitudes, bad attitudes. So the first group, some of the things that people said was that by actions, they said they remembered past experiences dealing with people in the church sometimes that didn't go all that well. The second one was criticism of other people. The third one was outspoken, domineering people. The fourth one, power struggles. And how about this one? Lack of communication. Isn't that really the problem with most of the things we're talking about? It always is. It's the problem in the home about not communicating. It's the problem between parents and children. It's a problem at school. It's the problem at work. It's all about communication. The next one was no time together outside the church. We don't have time to be with other people that need the Lord, but the Lord has told us we need to go and share the Lord. So how do we find the time, make the time to be with other people so that we can share that? It is an action. How about no involvement in extracurricular activities? You know, we could be so involved doing everything that we don't have any time to do anything spiritually for others. It's true. I mean, you can fill up every day of the week, every morning, every night with some extracurricular activity, and you fill in the blank, whatever those might be. How about this one? Now, these were church people who were being surveyed. They said, no involvement by preachers, elders, or deacons, not personal enough. Well, that's kind of indicting. And so we need to improve on that. And then basically some people say I'm shy, so I get a timeout. I get a King's X. No, you don't. You do not get a King's X timeout for being shy. You got to come out of that. Because the world is not going to serve everything to you on the silver platter because you're shy. Now, I'm going to embarrass my wife this morning, and I don't mean to. She heard me say this once before. When I first married my wife, she couldn't say boo to her own shadow. She was pretty introverted. I said, honey, you got to come out of that. I'm going to be a minister, and we're going to get to know people. My wife never meets a stranger. She'll talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime. God bless her for that. You don't get a King's X for being shy. You got to come out of that. You got to get out of your comfort zone and risk a little bit to love other people. And then here's the tough one that came out. A church that gossips. I could spend a month right there. People carrying grudges, too busy, discomfort with hugging or touching someone. Now, these are the people that grew up in a home where Daddy never told you he loved you. He never hugged you. Mom never embraced you. She never told you she loved you. And it's difficult. But if we're going to be loving people, we've got to come out of that. Lack of following up on other people's needs. Well, the second group was that of attitudes. They said attitudes came about in some people's life that they had a fear of change, that they like everything being the same way. A lack of close fellowship in the church. Sometimes we lack that. Oh, we're tight with the ones we're tight with, but we're not really close in fellowship with other people. People not knowing one another. You know, we feel like this is a big congregation, and in many ways it is. It's not a 100-member church. It's not even the same 300-member church it used to be on College Street. It's a lot bigger than that now. But before we get too big in the britches, let me tell you, there's a lot of churches bigger than this. And they know one another. And they love one another. How do they do it? They work at it. They work at it. They get out of their comfort zone and go from here to there and there to here and somehow meet in the middle and talk to people and embrace the love in the body of Christ. It takes a risk to do that. The social system that many people are in today Some people say the church is too big. It's funny, people that are in a big church want a smaller church, and then when they get to a smaller church, they say, wow, I wish we had more people. You can't have it both ways. It's going to be one or the other. And then the simple thing that we all know about, our kids know this, adults know this, too many cliques in the church. It's hard to break in. It's hard to break in. It's hard to break in. And then something as simple as pride keeps me from doing what I need to do. And then some people are just simply jealous of others. Oh, you spoke to them, but you didn't say hi to me, preacher. Well, excuse me. I didn't see you standing there. How about this one? Just pettiness. Little things being petty. How about caught up in materialism? Love Care Quotient said sometimes it keeps people from doing things because of materialism. I don't fit in with that group, whatever the case may be. And then simply competition. Several months ago, Keith and I have a dear family friend that lives in another state, and he suffered a major heart attack. And the paramedics had taken him to the hospital, and after a series of tests, with only a few hours, they had rushed him into a very serious operation. And they began to save his life, and thank the Lord that he came through that surgery. But the doctor told the family this was not the result of the apparent heart attack. This was the result of something that had started perhaps years ago, and maybe even genetically in his family. And it was the idea of the substance that was in his veins and arteries that's called plaque. Now, plaque used to be just something that was in your teeth or on your teeth. But now plaque is inside the arteries that carry the blood throughout our bodies. And this plaque had built up to the point to where it accumulated on the inside of those arteries, and it restricted the flow of blood that was giving him ultimately the life that he needed. Well, you say, well, Steve, that's an interesting story. Glad your friend's okay. What's that got to do with me? Let me tell you, if we don't have love flowing through our heart, it's building up with the hatred and the anger and the apathy of the world. And it's keeping us from being a loving congregation. The circulation in this man's body simply stopped because his heart could no longer pump hard enough to get it through. And eventually that's what happens to some churches. They become so inward they forget our purpose is not to be inside this building. Our purpose is to go into all the world. That means across the street, in our neighborhood, in our city, wherever, and share the gospel of Jesus. Well, similar to that plaque that forms inside our hearts oftentimes, it diminishes that blood flow, and it can become an obstacle of love to how we reach out and share with other people, how we identify with them, and how we confront that, and how it needs to be simply flushed out of our system, if you will. Well, these obstacles to love that keep us from loving, what are they? Some of those came forth in the letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. We know it as the first letter. There was actually 4. We've lost the first one, and there's another one he refers to. There was actually 4 letters, but that's another sermon, sorry. The first letter that he wrote, hidden here in Paul's classic essay on love. So let's look at them very quickly. Love's ideal tells us that love is patient. We all know that. Love is patient. The obstacle to that is, of course, the opposite, and that is being impatient. Impatience describes a person who has his or her own agenda. It's more important that you stop and listen to me than anyone else. And the squeaky wheel usually gets the grease, doesn't it? And so he or she has little time or concern for other people, and impatient people constantly must be entertained and listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. And quickly they lose interest in other people because they're not being listened to. The word Paul uses here for patience is interesting. If you look at the background of the word patience, we think we know what it means, but I want to tell you what it means in the Greek. It describes a person who has been wronged and has the power to avenge himself, but he chooses not to do it. That's being patient. That's being kind. That's showing mercy. Church, that's showing love. Impatience seeks revenge. Patience does not seek revenge. So would you rate yourself on that this morning? How would you say? Most of the time, I'm a patient man. I'm a patient woman. A patient son or daughter. Or would you say, I'd have to say I'm more impatient. Or maybe you get a star and say, I'm a patient person. And you are. Well, love's ideal next is that love is kind. And the obstacle, of course, is being unkind. Some people think kindness is synonymous with weakness. Oh, if I show that I'm kind to everybody, then they'll just roll all over me. Then I'm not being very strong. Well, these people are people that reason in their mind that their strength comes and it's obtained through kindness. And they are constantly in competition trying to win everybody because they think just being kind that they'll win people to be their friends. Well, we need to have more friends. We need to be more kind in all we are and all we're about. It is the readiness, I believe, of being kind to where we enhance the life of another person. That we're kind to others because we're going to enhance them to help them be better. And so answer that question. Most of the time, would you say you're kind? Or would you say you're unkind? The next one is love's ideal. It's trusting. And the obstacle to that ideal is being jealous. Love naturally means concern. As love grows, concern the person has for others also grows. Did you hear that? As love grows, our concern for other people grow. Most of the time that happens within us without even realizing it. It's just something that happens. We grow in that and pretty soon it becomes a habit. Jealousy is no concern that is grown out of control. Just as a cancer cell is once a normal cell, something has happened to that cell and now it's an outgrowth of something else. And pretty soon that's grown into jealousy. So most of the time, would you say you're a jealous person? Or would you say you're a trusting person? Love's ideal next is also humble. Love's obstacle is arrogance. Various Bible translations use different words, and you'll remember some of these. How about this? Boastful, rude, proud, anxious to impress, braggart, cherishes the idea of its own importance. And so an arrogant person will give their love away as though it were a tremendous favor to someone. Yes, I came up to see you at the hospital today. I had to walk 3 blocks to see you. I couldn't get on the elevator. I had to walk 6 flights of stairs, but take no worry, I'm here. You see? It's arrogance. It's arrogance. And you didn't do it to be arrogant. You should have done it to be in love with someone and to show God's love. So most of the time I'm arrogant or most of the time I'm humble. Love's ideal next shows that love is generous. And the opposite of that would be, of course, selfish. Is there any one quality that creates an insurmountable barrier to love? It has to be selfishness. Love and selfishness are by their very definition opposite in every way. Actions motivated by selfishness are exactly the opposite of love. Christ knew about the problem of selfishness. If anyone knew, Jesus Christ knew about selfishness. He said, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Have you ever thought about that? When I was a kid, my granddad taught me how to plant watermelons, and we just put maybe 1-2 seeds in a little hill. Have you ever thought about the number of watermelon seeds that you get over the course of a summer? But a seed had to die so seeds could come forth. It's beautiful. Most of the time I'm selfish or I'm generous. Which is it? Next, love's ideal is that love is slow to anger. The opposite of that is love's inability. the touchiness. Christ had strong words for those who are quick to anger. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 22, 23, and 24, "But I now tell you, whoever is angry with his brother will be brought before the judge. Whoever calls his brother, you good for nothing, will be brought before the council. And whoever calls his brother a worthless fool will be in danger of going into the fire of hell." That's pretty serious. He says, "Then, wherefore, my beloved brethren, as James said, let every man be swift to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger." James 1, verse 19. Would you say most of the time that you are irritable or touchy? Or would you say you're slow to anger? You're the only one that knows that. Love's ideal is love is forgiving or it's resentful. Resentfulness is the accumulation of irritation suffered in the past, recalling it in the present. The word Paul uses here for resentfulness was an accountant's word. It was used as an item in a ledger that would not be forgotten. This was done, and so I record this here. It's exactly what people do, and it becomes an obstacle to loving other people. Let me ask you, you fill this in for me. Oh, I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget it. Have you ever heard that? How about have you ever said it? It mocks the true meaning of forgiveness. This is a hard one. It's hard. I think of all the ones, this is the hardest for all of us. That we simply say we will forgive, but we cannot forget. I remember when a woman back in the Civil War, after it was over with, President Lincoln came and visited, and she met him outside of the house, and there was an old tree that was there. It had been in the family for years, and through the shrapnel and the bullets and everything that had gone off, she called President Lincoln's attention and said, "Look at this tree. This was once a beautiful tree in our family. Look at it. Look what the war has done." And he looked at her and he said, "Madam, cut it down. Cut it down. That's the only way you're going to get past it." Are there some things we need to cut down? Maybe there are. Most of the time, I'm a resentful person, or most of the time, I'm a forgiving person. Love's ideal hates evil. Love's ideal, love hates evil. Love's obstacle is loving evil. What did Paul mean when he said, love hates evil? Well, you know, when we think about that, surprisingly, people who work the hardest at their high moral standards often love evil the most. You know why I know that? Because so many men and women, boys and girls get caught up in things where they think they're finding love, but it's not true love. And we stand on our moral high ground and say one thing and do another. Oftentimes they gloat at the hurt or the misery and the stumbling of other people, and they compromise with the world. And they look forward to the day of judgment when those sorry hypocrites will stand before the Lord and they'll get theirs. And where is the love in that? The message of the gospel brings condemnation by the very fact of claiming to be loving people. So would we say most of the time, I love others, or most of the time, I hate others and I hate evil? Love's ideal next is always there. Love is always there. Love's obstacle is inconsistency. False love has its endurance with the idea of love. It doesn't last when things get tough. Oh, it's hard to keep on being that kind of person and going the extra mile, and pretty soon, sometimes we look around and we say, hey, I'm the only one going the extra mile here. Where's the troops? And it's hard to carry that burden all of your life saying, I'm the one that's going to do that. And so we must rally together. When someone begins to falter, someone else picks up the load. And we reach out and we continue to do that. It's called being consistent. The opposite is being inconsistent. Paul says, real love never fails. What does never mean? Never means never. What does forever mean? Forever means forever. Most of the time, I'm inconsistent or I'm consistent with my love. Oh, most of us, if we're honest, I think we would have to say, I'm consistent with my love when it's very convenient for me. Let's see, I'm not doing anything Tuesday. See how we fit it into our schedule? Instead of looking for doors of opportunity where we can be showing our love all the time. If we look at these barriers of love, as we talk about the love-care quotient, you can categorize these by obstacles that keep us from being that kind of person to the description that we have in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It takes positive steps, and here's the key word for today, to be intentional in our loving other people. To be intentional, that we look for a way to serve. We look for a way to show a loving act. It also identifies for us the obstacles to love and constantly to be alert to those things that would creep into one's life and restrict the outflow of loving someone else. Back to my friend for just a moment who suffered that terrible heart attack. The only medical solution was for him to have a complete change in his lifestyle. Because probably of genetics, he had to change everything about the way he had been for the past 40 years. Ultimately, our love and loving others may require a tremendous change, beginning a regular program in our life of loving other people. In this theme of living for Jesus and learning to love for Jesus, the challenge of loving other people is vital for the church. It's vital for you as an individual in the church, but it's vital for the entire church. It's vital for all of us to say this is a loving, vital church that shares that love. So today we've looked at the obstacles, or if you'll let me use the word, the plaque, to keep us from being the loving people that we ought to be. And so you've had an opportunity to rate yourself on love's ideal and obstacles to love. And can you as a Christian actually make a commitment this morning? As you leave this place, you say, I am going to determine. And isn't it odd that this is already the last Sunday in January? We're blowing through this year, and we've got to make haste. And we've got to learn to say, I'm going to make a commitment to love other people, and I'm going to be more loving than I was last year. And I'm going to step out and be that kind of person. In the coming weeks, I hope that I can help us, that I can help me become more of a loving person, and to put it into perfect action, to commit to practicing love of Jesus. You know, church, when we live for Jesus, we'll make a change. When we live for Jesus, we'll make a change in our life and our commitment to be more loving as Christ. Listen, as Christ was loving to you and me. That's the kind of love we all ought to soar toward. This morning, if you're subject to the gospel invitation, we'd love to help you in any way. Maybe there's prayers we can offer for you. You've been in Bible class, you've been listening for a while, you're ready to obey the gospel. We stand ready to help you this morning. Let's stand and let's sing as Rick leads us in this good hymn.